Hello, thank you so much for coming and joining us, Elise Dopson. And you are a B2B Saas writer and agency owner and community runner. You have a lot going on.
Yes, I'm spinning a lot of plates.
So I'm so excited to dig into B2B Saas because this is a space that you're going to tell me, but it's almost like they are really starting to see content have effects and results. And so they're leaning into it a lot more with their marketing budgets. And I seem to see, whenever I see job listings, it's at least a quarter of them are all in SaaS. So That's really cool. So I'd love to hear what brought you to the SaaS space and what's kept you there. And maybe even what is SaaS? Because for some people, they might be thinking we're talking about being sassy.
It can be both. Yeah, it can be both. I determine SaaS as a software product that people use as a service. So most times it will be a monthly or a yearly subscription to a tool or an app. So that is how I would define SaaS, as well as being sassy. That's always a good thing. I fell into this space by chance, to be honest. I was working at a marketing agency that did marketing for any company you could possibly think of, like from wall cladding to pet insurance. I wrote about it all. And I said at the time in 2015 or very early 2016, I said to my boss, look, long form content is going to be the way to go. Let me try it for the agency website first. And if it works, let's roll it out to clients. Long story short, it ended up working, obviously, because I was right. My predictions were right. But I found by that point, I really enjoyed writing for the agency more than I did the clients. So I left to freelance, and the SaaS route into that was by chance. I was working with a few SaaS companies at the time. They were just the ones that were hiring, and luck brought me in that place. And then I figured out that I liked SaaS because it was so predictable. Like SaaS clients know this is how many customers I have paying this amount per month. They're basically almost guaranteed, give and take a little bit of churn. They're almost guaranteed the same amount of revenue every month. So they can very clearly and very accurately and very predictably say, we have this budget to give to a freelancer this month. And it's very same month to month. So the second reason why I moved into SaaS as well is also because of the money, because they can make so much money by scaling the same tool and the same product without necessarily hiring more people and doing all of that stuff that's normally associated with growing a business. A SaaS is very stable. So I've seen success stories of SaaS companies who have hired something like 10 employees and they make millions a year. So they have all of that cash sat there waiting to be spent on marketing, and they give it to freelancers willingly to do content for them. So that was another big reason why I moved into SaaS, is because of the money.
Yeah. And would you say, because SaaS can also be the source of investment firms like private equity and people doing rounds and stuff. So it's almost like they'll have, not only do they have a great cash basis as it is, but they'll have this influx where they want to push marketing and scale it beyond what they can handle. So it's almost like they have to have freelancers. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, definitely. And I go for a specific sub niche in SaaS as well. So I look for funded startups that have the money to spend in marketing. You can look at sites like Crunchbase. There's a few Twitter sites that I can remember. I will send them to you to include however you publish this, that people can look out for. But that is a really good way to figure out if companies have money to spend on freelancers, because it's relatively easy to find a SaaS company who wants to hire a freelancer. Let's just put it out there. It's very easy because there's so many of us and there's so many SaaS companies as well. It's like the demand is out of scale. But the good ones who are willing to pay money need to prove that to the people who have invested money in the company. So you need to come and say, I can give you this result. Here's like proof to back it up. I think if you can do all of them, that is a good way to go.
Yeah. And that gets to a really neat question of what traits make the best writers in that space. So it sounds like being able to talk about results and getting that information from customers after you work with them might be one of them.
Yeah, and I would even argue that across the board, I've worked with freelancers in different industries, and I'd say writing is not necessarily the number one skill. And people look at me like crazy when I say this.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, you have to be a great writer to earn great money. But there's so many things on top of that I call like business skills that you need to learn to be able to demand those rates. Because if you come and say to someone, I charge $1,000 for a blog post, they're going to say, will I make that money back? Are you worth that investment? And if you don't have the business skill to communicate that and say, yeah, this is what I've done in the past, this is why you should hire me. This is how much money you can make. Speak to one of my other clients if you really want the backup. I think all of those things come together to make a freelancer more valuable than just the writing skill that they have, if that makes sense.
Totally. I think I'm not sure this came from him, but Brendan Hufford would say like the easiest way to make money is to sell people money, sell their money back to them, like at a smaller rate. So once you can figure out how marketing does that, then it's just this confidence you have during the call of, yes, it is worth it to hire me and at higher rates.
Exactly. Yeah. And as well, when you're trying to get new clients, I think people zone in on getting new clients all of the time, when a lot of my income has come from repeat clients who I've impressed with these business skills. So I think the biggest thing that I look for when I'm hiring freelancers and when I've spoken to content managers who hire them also is just to get the basics. So if you're going to miss a deadline, try not to, but if you are, don't let the day go past and just assume that they never forgot about it. Timely revisions. So someone who jumps in and say, yeah, I've seen all of these comments. I understand where you've come from with this. Give me an extra 2 days or a week and I'll turn around a revised version. That giving feedback is the toughest thing to do from a content manager's side. And also from the freelance side, it's the toughest thing to take. But I contribute feedback to the biggest improvement in my skill is working with people who know what they're talking about, sometimes more than me, to create a piece of content as a collective. It's always so much better than just my point of view.
Yeah, and that sounds the opposite of what a new writer can go into it with, which is I either got it or I got it wrong. So if there's feedback, I got it wrong. So it sounds like taking a more developmental approach to it and accepting that even the best writer will have feedback because that's just how it gets better and how it gets closer to the marketing manager's expectations.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes I think it's important to say that not all feedback has to be taken on board. This again is a controversial thing that I say to people is if you don't agree with the feedback, you don't have to. So long as you have a reason why and you can prove to the client that maybe they're wrong, like I did this for a reason. If you can communicate that and put that in the Google Doc comment as a reply to theirs, a lot of content managers really value that because it proves that you've put thought into the piece that you created in the first place and that you really actually do know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's almost, instead of seeing the comment bar as corrections, it's like just having it as a conversation and thoughts back and forth. There's something different about that I hadn't thought about before, where it's just, they really are throwing all of the thoughts that come to mind out there. And then you as the expert would say, yes, let's do that. No, let's not do that. And have a reason why.
Yeah, because if the person who's giving the feedback is a product person, they want to push their product features as much as possible. And sometimes that's not the right way to do it. And sometimes if you do take that feedback and have call to actions in every single paragraph, it turns people off and then you don't get the results that you'd want from that content because you've let the client take the lead on something that they shouldn't.
And that's really interesting. You mentioned having a product marketer review it. Can you speak to maybe some of the different kinds of people who might be seeing your work when you work in SaaS?
Yeah, so I think it depends largely on the type of client. Like I mentioned before, a lot of my clients are enterprise funded companies. They have hundreds of internal employees that go through the content process. So with one of my clients, for example, I have a point of contact who is the content manager. Then I have a separate editor. So the content manager will brief and say, this is what we want, this is the result, these are the things that you should potentially cover. So I would take it from there. I also have someone who edits the piece after it goes in. So they do copy edits. It's if I've missed a comma somewhere or, I've done something silly like that and I've not proofread it as good as I should have done. Sometimes I do have a different structural editor. So they'll go through and pick out the parts that maybe I should have included, but I haven't, or I could build on this section a little bit more to make it stronger. That is my favorite type of editor to work with because, like I said, collaboration is so much, like I attribute so much to great content. And then after that, I try and get my work fact checked all the time, just because I never want to be in a position where I've published something that is factually incorrect. And that is, it's very hard to do these days, especially when people make up statistics just for the sake of it. Like you can never find the original source of something, like for the life of me. So I have someone on the internal team double check that everything I'm saying is true and accurate and watertight.
Yeah.
And then sometimes if we want to throw another person in, we do have a product person who goes in, and says, this feature ties in with this, can we mention there? Even if it's just a screenshot saying you can do this thing that you're talking about using the product. So that is an overview of everyone who could be involved. I try to keep it as streamlined as possible because too many voices overcomplicates the whole thing sometimes. So if I could pick like the ideal workflow, it would be a content manager for the brief, me obviously for the writing, a copy editor, a structural editor, and that's it.
Yeah, I love, it's just like opening a door and you just see all of this unfold of how much work and how many people go into this, because we'll still have people come in who are used to $50 and $100 articles, and that's an entirely different kind of writing. That's just not even in the same world as what you're doing when you step into $1,000 and $1,500 articles. And I'm also hearing, part of the hard part of niching is knowing when you've found your niche. And it struck me that the process you described for things that aren't my niche, I hate that. If I have people leaving comments, it's just, get it over with, just stop, just accept it. I don't want to talk about it. But the things that I love, like when I really love the work, I do welcome like constructive ideas for how to make it better and what's missing. And did we think about this? And could we add this here? So it's almost like your internal radar for what your niche is might be the things that you want to spend that amount of time on, because otherwise you're not going to give a good client experience. You aren't going to welcome edits, and it's just going to, I don't know, you just want to get it over with. So that struck me.
Yeah, and clients pick up on that as well. I can tell a million miles away if a freelancer actually enjoys doing the work they're doing for me, no matter what price they're billing me at. I can really tell if they're enjoying it or they're just doing it to make money. And just to put it out there, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with freelancing just to make money. I came into this for the same reason. But I think if you want to make the most amount of money possible, you have to care about the stuff that you're giving to clients. And sometimes, I've worked with people who it's so obvious that they don't take feedback, or when they do, it's not the feedback that I gave, like they just did the bare minimum. And those are the people that I won't continue to work with. So even though they've charged me a high rate, they won't necessarily get that all of the time because I won't work with them again.
Exactly. And there's something out there for all of us in B2B. So you don't have to stay with one space. If you want to get it over with, you can keep exploring.
Yeah.
I love that. So I wonder, maybe talking about the typical SaaS marketer who hires writers. So what kind of problem are they trying to solve, and what are they doing with content? Like, why are they even doing content marketing?
Yeah, so there's two things that I've seen from my experience. The first one is they want consistency because they do have so much money coming in predictable every month. They want to have writers on hand who they can confidently say, I can spend this amount on this person, this amount on this person, and this is the deliverable I'm going to get in return. So they do want that consistency. They want to know spending X amount to get X amount, blog post, white paper, whatever it may be. And they want those consistently because they do have the money to spend. The second one is a lot of them have very talented people in-house, like product and knowledge wise, but they either don't have the time or skill to write the content themselves. So a lot of times people come to me and say, we have an internal person who wants to write this piece of content. They've done a rough outline, but they don't have the time, or they're not great writers, so they can't do it themselves. That is where a lot of writers make so much money, because first of all, you're ghostwriting, so you can charge an extra fee for that. And second of all, a lot of the time the research is already done for you. So if you did break it down into an hourly rate, you might spend, 3 hours less time on research because the outline's done, but you're still charging.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then if you do that frequently enough, you can become this trusted voice for that person. And if they really like the experience, maybe suddenly that person needs to do one blog every month and have that become like a regular article or thing. And so I wonder, we talked a little bit about the pricing chain. I think we hit some of those themes already, but as much as you're willing or able to share, what kind of marks a beginner as they transition into an intermediate writer and then an advanced writer, both from the sense of like how they approach their writing and the quality of the work they're doing and what they're billing?
Yeah, so this is interesting actually, because we recently did a rate survey at Peak Freelance. We've just gone through and analysed all of the results. So I've got the very top line data here that I'm going to share with you. Okay, so half of those earning less than 30K a year have been writing for less than 2 years. So that's interesting. I think that shows that the more experienced you are, the more confident you are to charge higher rates. And the portfolio and the results you have to back up help you get those higher rates. And one interesting thing that I pulled out as well was everyone earning six figures had been writing for at least 2 years, and 65%, which is a big chunk, have been doing it for more than 6 years. Like experience, portfolio samples are also important.
I have a theory on that too, though. I think the only ones of us who make it that far realize you have to charge more to stay freelance. Because if you're making less than six figures, you might as well go in-house for all the stress and risk and just like to have a quality of life. Yeah, it almost seems it's because they figured out that you have to charge a lot more.
I agree. Completely agree. So we was talking about the rates for beginner, intermediate, and advanced. We have data that says 3/4 of those earning less than 30K a year charge less than $400 a blog post. I would say that is a beginner to intermediate rate, $400 for a long form blog post. Assume if I was paying that, I would expect a draft. I'd expect some SEO optimization, some keywords in there, maybe meta titles, descriptions, images, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't necessarily expect someone to have done heavy research for that price. I personally charge, I'm happy to share my rate. I charge $12.50 for a long form piece, but that does go up depending on if I need to interview someone in-house or I need to do some extra data research, maybe create my own data somehow with the survey. And that includes one revision. So I think that's important to consider in rates, is if you are going back and agreeing to rejig everything, if the client says, well, maybe this is not quite right, which does happen even. So yeah, for that rate, I include an outline. So I send an outline of all the research, all the points that I plan to include in the piece. A client says, yay or nay, we collaborate on that. And as soon as I get the go ahead, the actual draft has a clear scope report. So that I found is a huge value add to clients, because it says these are the terms that you need to also include in this piece if you want to rank for this main term. And it gives you like a grade, like plus I always aim for. It just makes sure that you've covered every question that a person would have on this topic. That tells you how your article should be structured. Because I think this is going off on another tangent here, but I think a lot of people have the same process, and it's why content is also very similar. If you go to page 1 on Google and search for a SaaS related term, every piece of content will have exactly the same structure. And it's because people go through and say, okay, what do I need to include to rank on Google, when that's not necessarily true. I've seen really great results from steering away from that what is, benefits of, challenges of, and using stories, quotes, real life examples. All of those things are unique and keep people on the page, and that's an important thing to consider. So that's what I do in a expensive blog post that I'm billing, is I interview people. I get quotes from Help a B2B Writer, shameless plug. I use my network, because that is what clients want to lean into. If you are coming as a writer and saying, I deserve this rate because 1, I'm a good writer, 2, I deliver on time, and 3, I have this whole network of experts that you can get access to through me. So I think that is a big differentiator between how much you can charge.
Yeah. And I wonder, for the marketing manager, is there something they look for that's different from other niches, or that they're more interested in? Because SEO can be something that, for example, in HR and digital marketing, there's usually a SEO agency that looks at the post before or after I work on it. So that's not often top of mind for me. But would you say SEO is a standard thing for a SaaS?
I would say so, yeah. And I think alongside SEO is journalistic style content. I've very noticed a huge trend towards that. So instead of what is, challenges of, benefits, it's these people who've been through this is what they had to say about it, and weaving that through the SEO. That's the trend that I'm noticing, and that is what clients are willing to pay for, I think, these days, because research takes a lot of time. And I always joke that if someone did research as a service, I would be like the biggest customer of that. So if any of your audience members want to do that, please tell me, and I will you to do all of my research.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been following Civic Science, which is probably more consumer based, but they do have just the most random polls in the world, and they share the results on that. So it's something like that for B2B could be really interesting. Yeah, that's your next business idea.
I
need a 6.
going on.
Right? And I wonder, I didn't ask this in advance, but I wonder if there's impromptu stuff here for the reader for B2B Saas. Do they tend to fit a certain profile? I guess I'm just assuming executive level, and it depends on the industry for the SaaS, but are there any shared characteristics there?
Yeah, so this is actually ties in with the type of freelancers I look for when I'm vetting profiles and portfolios. This is going to sound really blunt, but I'm sick of seeing like, what is X? Ultimate guide to X. And I think the types of companies and SaaS companies that create those are huge. Like sometimes the only reason they rank for them is for the brand awareness. It doesn't give any like business value to them other than ranking number one for whatever it may be. So I think a lot of freelancers trip themselves up over that and create samples and guest posts on very high level stuff. But if you think about the results that you want to get from your content, it's paid accounts, free trials, less churn, and you don't get all of that by telling somebody something they already know. So I like to see comparisons. I like to see how to use this tool to do this specific thing. I like to see a lot more in-depth things. And when I've been a buyer of this software, if I see a SaaS company publish like what is content marketing, I'm like, I already know that. You're not speaking to me. So I think that is a good thing to think of.
Yeah, and that overview of just the most common things they're trying to get out of the content, I feel like that's really helpful too. So like churn, trials. Yeah. Cool. And I wonder, when it comes to research, which has been a theme that comes up a bit, are there any go-to sources that you have as far as thought leadership or seminal reports that if somebody's brand new to SaaS and they're like, I need to understand just what's important here, where do you tend to go for that?
Yeah, so a lot of the clients that I work with are in the marketing and e-commerce space, but in general, I look for Forrester, Gartner, and McKinsey. They're all three big sources. They invest millions every year into just research, and it tells you a lot about how people think. And if you can understand the psychology behind why people buy software, you can weave that into your content. Even if you're not using the exact statistic in a piece of content, you can use it. Your HubSpot and Content Marketing Institute also do annual reports. I always recommend a paid Statista account. It's so worth it. I think it's like $39 a month, but I use it pretty much every day. It has statistics on anything you can think of. 100% recommend that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've pulled up Statista just as a source, but I hadn't looked at the paid stuff for that.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. And also, one quick tip I use is Twitter. I use Twitter a lot. I follow people who are experts in the SaaS space, in the retail, in the e-commerce space. And when I'm looking for people's quotes and things to include that is not my point of view, I do a Twitter search and I filter it by people you follow, because Twitter searches for everyone just pulls up a load of garbage. But if you like carefully pick the type of people that you want to follow and reputable, trustworthy influencers, if you like, in your space, you can pull their opinions without necessarily asking them to contribute a quote.
Yeah. And for them, that's a huge win because it's content they've already put time into. So they're just getting more views on that, getting their leadership like reaffirmed.
Yeah.
So I wonder, it's never fun to speak negatively, but we want people to go into this with open eyes. If you had to come up with cons for writing in this space, or why parts that could be hard for somebody just coming into this freely, what would people want to think about or know about before they get into SaaS?
I would say there's two big things that come to mind. The first one is very crowded right now because there is so much money to be made. And to be fair, there are many SaaS companies that are hiring writers. But in the last 3 years, there's been this boom of SaaS writers, and everywhere you go now, there's someone promising to write this type of content. And with so much competition, don't take this as a bad thing, but it's very hard to stand out against people who have comparable skill to you. I think this is where you need to put a lot of time and effort into networking, into marketing, into doing free guest posts that hopefully turn into a long-term gig. But if not, you still get the byline for that. Those I need to have. When I started, I didn't necessarily need to do all of that because there wasn't so many of us. So I think I hit the jackpot there with the timing on my side. And the other one is that SaaS is very process driven, and it's very rare for a lot of clients to give you the flexibility to be creative. So they want to say, this is the keyword that we want. We want people to turn into subscribers. These are the things that you need to cover. It doesn't give you much leeway to be creative and do any creative writing, especially since we'd already mentioned that the results page for B2B and SaaS terms are very oversaturated, very hard to make a creative piece of content that stands out against that, both for readers and for Google, when everything is so process driven.
And pulling back to what you shared earlier, there might be creativity in bringing a journalist's approach to it, but it's still the structure of what story they want to tell and what you're actually conveying. Don't expect to have creative license there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if we compare it to a B2C industry, a client might, in the travel space, say, we want to write about the things you can do in Venice, and you can go and do all of the research that you want. You can take any route that you want to take. But if someone's saying, we want you to write a piece about how to use this technology, we can't really do so much with that.
Yeah. It's like, start with what kind of coffee you're going to make it. And I wonder, that kind of prompts the question. There's this idea of, it's like when the freelance market reaches maturity with the demand for content, do you see people hiring in-house more? And then how would you do the pros and cons of that kind of thing if we saw SaaS brands wanting to bring people in?
I think that is a possibility, but then again, I'm not like sold on it, just because SaaS is predictable. So yeah, they could bring people in-house, but I think the beauty of why a lot of SaaS companies hire freelancers is that get different voices, different nets. So they want someone who has their fingers in a lot of pies and knows what's going on in the industry at the time. And you can always get someone motivated in-house to do that. Whereas if you say, we will continue hiring you if you keep doing this, is more of an incentive for the freelancer to do all of that upfront work. I just don't see people taking in-house jobs anymore, especially like given the remote work, we can work wherever we want. I think that is too big of a deal breaker for people to give up their freelance jobs. I say now I'm unemployable just because I enjoy my freelance business so much. I earn great money. I work when I want. I work with who I want to work with. And I think that any good freelancer would be cautious about giving all of that up to take an in-house job.
Yeah, I see that too. And I think part of it almost feels like it's the SaaS business model, like they're designed to be as flexible as possible so that companies can plug into it, use it, cancel it, get out of it. So that same kind of approach to keep things light and to not bring on a lot of long-term employees who's going to increase your bottom line and all these other things, and maybe even change how attractive you are to be bought out or purchased or invested in or whatever. So freelance, it gives us the ultimate flexibility and them the ultimate flexibility. So that's really interesting. I feel like there was a deeper question about in-house versus out, but maybe it's not as pertinent because everybody is trying to be freelance. So cool. I think that brings us to the end of my questions. Did you have anything that might have come up that would be exciting to include, or does that kind of cover it?
I think that does cover everything. Oh, one quick thing. We did have a question about red flags you see in companies that I really wanted to touch on. There's 3 things that I noticed. The first is obvious, is low rates. So if someone's promising like, we pay 5 cents a word, just avoid it. It's not worth the time and effort that you're going to put into that project. The second one is the promise of exposure. So sometimes people say, big companies often do this, it's really bad, is they find freelancers and say, we can't pay you for this piece, but you can have a link on our website, and you just don't take it. It's not worth the time. I think the exposure that you get is so minimal. You can get that from doing something, a 15-minute activity, a 15-minute tweet will give you the same exposure. And the third one is free trials. So never work for anyone for free unless it is a guest post. If it is a post that you want to do, make sure it's one, really good on a site that your clients read, and on a publication that people know, because I can't tell you the amount of times that I've seen portfolios and it's like, I've been featured in X, and nobody knows what X is. And I just think if you spent that time really refining your craft and making sure that your content was good enough to reach these prestigious publications, then you don't have to do free trials later down the line.
Or even literally publishing to your LinkedIn as a post. It's like, it'll give you the same boost, but without benefiting someone who's taking advantage of you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I try to think about that, make sure both sides of it are equal. Because if you have a favorite local nonprofit and you could really help them with a case study and they'll give you a glowing review, I could be talked into that. That feels like 50-50 to me. But if it's a mysterious SaaS who just wants a free thing and is hyping up how great it'll be for you, that's a user. That is somebody who's trying to take advantage of you.
And with free trials as well, I have seen, this is another really bad practice that some companies have, is they advertise a freelance writing job, have everyone do a free trial and have no intention to actually hire someone. They just use all of that free content on their website. So if you are doing a trial, unless it's a guest post, obviously, always make sure that you're paid for it. One way to frame that is to say, I only work on retainer usually, but we can do a paid trial piece, a one-off. There's no pressure to hire me after that. So if you frame it that way, it makes you look more professional and you don't get stuck giving someone free content and nothing in return.
Yeah. And it's like that mindset of the car can't run without gas. Like, you should not be writing without being paid. Like, that's where you want to go, eventually being paid before a deposit rather than net 30 and all this stuff. But it's a journey we're all on.
Yeah. And I want to say that I still haven't got it all figured out. I think it's very easy to look up to freelancers. I've been there and looked up to people who I thought were doing incredibly. And then I've talked to them from my position now, and they're like, back then I didn't know a single thing, it just looked like I did. So don't take everyone else's advice as gospel, because what works for me might not work for everyone. I'm just happy to share what has worked for me, and if you can take something from that, then that's great.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much.
As a side note, if you enjoyed our conversation today, I want to encourage you to check out the B2B Writing Career Kickstarter. This is the all-in-one class that introduces you to B2B, helps you figure out your niche, and then a couple times a year, we actually get together and write your first clips together. If you'd like more information about that, just click the link in the course below or head to b2bwritinginstitute.com. Thanks for joining.